So I want to just quickly introduce again who we're seeing here today on this panel. So for the people who are watching this live or during the recording session. So Subham Gupta from Space Resources Laboratory, Malek Trabelsi-Loeb from Vernonville Management Consultancies, Vitaly Brown from European Space Agency, Amar Vora from Circle, Jakub Korsik from ISI, Jeremy Schill from OrbitFab, Ricardo Conde from Portuguese Space Agency, Alex Goffrey from Astroscale, and Alison Claire Decker from Alison Claire Law. So it's a lot of people on this panel, but obviously now we're going to be discussing a very important piece here, which is a space junk. So with the first question here for the panel, I would like to just ask everybody, whoever would like to answer that question, what is the current state of the space debris, and what impact does it currently have on the future space missions, and how we can mitigate its effects? So whoever would like to open that.
I'll just jump in and start off. So, and I'm sure others will add as well, but basically right now our space debris is just drastically increasing. We have about 5,000 active satellites in lower Earth orbit. And we have, that's only part of it, and that's expected to sort of quadruple by the end of the decade. And then there's the trackable orbital debris, and there's approximately 30,000 pieces of that. And then on top of that, there's hundreds of millions of pieces of untrackable orbital debris, ranging in size from a marble to a paint fleck. And all of those things can cause significant damage to active satellites as well as human space missions in space. So that's a humongous problem. And we also are seeing debris sort of not in that same scale, but start to seeing it on celestial bodies like Mars and the Moon from different missions that have gone there and either successfully landed or crashed. So there's definitely an increase in debris, and it's sort of grown exponentially. And one of the concerns there really is that we may make LEO somewhat unusable for future generations, just because you'll be spending so much time avoiding debris, or it won't be safe really to have lots of space stations up there if you're going to be constantly trying to move to avoid debris or risking human life in that. And then there's also an increased risk of debris back on Earth from orbital debris. And that's sort of disproportionately borne by the global south, because space debris is much more likely to land in those latitudes. So it's sort of an unfair kind of situation, because a lot of the launching states are not necessarily going to be as highly impacted.
Also, if I can add to that, along with over 4,000 satellites, we also have about over 128 million pieces of debris, including old satellites, bits of rocket stages. We have paint flecks, which might not seem like dangerous objects, but when they're orbiting the Earth at such high velocities, the momentum is so high that it can tear through body in space, and the effects could be catastrophic. And I mean, we would seriously, while agencies are working on removing space debris actively, I think we need to have regulations so that when there's a satellite launched in space, they should have considered deorbiting at the end of life, which is going to be key to preventing further accumulation of space debris.
Let me also, if you allow me, put some other perspective on the table. I think there are two dimensions here. Is itself somehow mitigating what we have been done so far with the space race, right? 1.0. We are entering we are in the second space race. That this deserves some kind of, as our colleague has said, really a commitment, international commitment, to look this as a serious problem. And there are two dimensions. One is the dimension itself to implement some kind of policies and coordinations between the nations at the level of space laws. I really believe this is a start point. I'm talking about, we are in the middle of the revision of a space law here in Portugal, and to give more, to be more robust, and to try to implement these measures. And then there are should be some body, probably we are talking about UNOS or some international, let's say, body that can merge some basic rules in the national space laws to at least be the first, let's say, collaboration step to think in the future of sustainability. This is one dimension, but there are other dimensions, which is to fix what we have done. So remove the space junk that we have in orbit. And for that, I think it is really attractive to look this in a business perspective. If you look this in a business perspective, I really believe in one scenario. And I really wanted to share this with you, if you also to have some food for thoughts. You remember, probably you are aware about this, some years ago, long time ago, there was a problem in one of big cities in Italy. It was because the garbage. And there are some fights about the business for garbage. And what the inspiration, the public authorities, they were inspired to, how can we manage with that? They were so kind of innovative and they create a tax. So the tax to collect the garbage to pay the service. I really believe, if you look at this perspective, I will not be surprised. This is something that some persons there start to address this topic, is somehow we will be confronted in our bill on the water with a tax for space debris tax. That means this will be a collective effort to pay what we did to promote technologies to remove space debris. I don't see any other possibility in the perspective of the business, because at the end, this will be a public, let's say, activities or public responsibility, but somehow we currently we are beneficiating the space technology. So at the end of the day, we will pay a fee to remove what we have done during the space race. I will start to send this to the table to discuss, because there are these two dimensions, acting in prevention, but also the dimension to recollect what or remove the problem that we create. This is something that I want to leave for the discussion. This is, let's say, my 5 cents for the discussion.
Very good points. Very good points, by the way. So, okay, so noted, that's for sure. What about right now, the following question that we have, so maybe geared towards Vitaly Brown, as we have here in a room. So the question for you, Vitaly, would be, what are the technological challenges? And obviously everybody else on the panel would love to also get your input, but what are the technological challenges in tracking and monitoring space debris? And how can we improve our understanding of the space debris field to reduce the risk of the collisions?
Yes. Thank you, Martinez. So we have heard already about the debris that's trackable and the non-trackable one. And then you have to ask the question, of course, why is there a share of trackable objects and why is there so much we cannot see? And it's just because debris comes with a size distribution, in the sense that there's stuff that is large and we can see it with ground-based instruments, which are the only means we have right now to continuously monitor the debris environment. And those are radars and telescopes to perform surveys, but there's also other instruments like lasers, for instance, to do better refinements. But with those instruments, radars and telescopes, we are able to monitor debris up to or down to sizes of about 10 centimeters, which is the size of an apple, more or less. And in some instances, we can even go lower, like the debris environment around the ISS, which is flying low. The lower we get, the closer we get to Earth, the higher the sensitivity is for the little debris. And so the challenge really is to go lower to see also the debris from 1 to 10 centimeter in size. If we speak of 1 centimeter objects at the size of a coffee bean, we speak already of a number of about 1 million objects out there. We don't see them, and we at ESA have suffered one impact to our Sentinel-1 satellite in 2016 into the solar panel from an object we did not see. We call those objects rightfully so lethal, non-trackable ones, because we cannot see them, but they are large enough to destroy your satellite. They come with an impact energy with about 10 kilometers per second. That's the impact velocity we had for Sentinel also. And this corresponds to an energy of about a hand grenade or a car that crashes into a wall with 50 kilometers per hour. Now, the challenge really is to get into instruments that either have much more increased detectability or sensitivity to put radars. But if you do so, and this is something that, for instance, the US military is demonstrating right now with the S-band radar in Kwajalein, it comes also with a huge cost. So operating those radars is not cheap. It requires a lot of effort. And then the farther you go out, because we have also the perspective that there's a lunar environment that we might occupy with missions, the more difficult it gets, because the volume of space you have to screen also increases drastically. So one challenge indeed is to make instruments more sensitive. And the second is to increase them in numbers and basically find ways of screening intense volumes if we are serious also about addressing space debris in environments that are much higher than low Earth orbit. Sorry.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add maybe just 2 cents as well, echoing everything that Vitaly mentioned. I think what we need is an integrated architecture of both on-ground sensors and potentially in-orbit sensors as these become more mature and more established, and a combination of both publicly available data and commercial data. Who takes ownership of this? Still up for debate, but there needs to be sort of an integrated architecture for us to improve our sort of domain awareness of our space environment. That's all I wanted to add.
And if I can add a little bit to that, I think in addition to identifying the space debris, cataloging is a massive issue. We're adding more and more space debris every day, and cataloging and managing these bits of space debris in real time is going to be a huge hassle for the agencies and the institutions. And any discrepancy or any mistakes in tracking the trajectory of these space debris could lead to potential collisions, because space debris is affected by so many different bodies and its trajectory is quite unpredictable. But I think I might not be the best person to talk about the trajectory of space debris, but that's what I feel. I think there's so many bodies affecting these millions of debris that an exact trajectory monitoring is quite necessary for these pieces.
Yeah. So while we're also talking about punishing maybe in some way, again, companies who are not, paying attention to the, catastrophic implication that the space debris can create in the future. We all heard the term Kessler syndrome. So how about, and also as Ricardo also mentioned, kind of that, right? So how we can also look from a different angle and also try to incentivize companies and nations to clean up their debris in orbit, and what measures can be taken to ensure that they follow through on their commitments?
Yeah, maybe I can come in on something there. So I think this has always been the really difficult question. I think everyone recognizes the problem, but who pays for sorting it out has always been a challenge. What we've done at Astroscale is we've initially been working with very large constellation providers, such as OneWeb. So these large constellation providers they're self-invested to remove their failed satellites from their own orbit because they pose a risk to the rest of their constellation. So when you talk about an incentive, it's really a simple equation for them of, do they pay for a service now, or do they risk the loss of their whole constellation in the future? So we're looking to perform the first commercial debris removal of a OneWeb spacecraft with our ELSA-M mission, which is due to launch in 2025. I think the challenge then is how do we also incentivize other space actors? So people who have a number of small satellites, maybe in different orbits, And I think making sure that there is some sort of funding there to support failed satellites for smaller operators is key. And I like Ricardo's idea of a space tax. That's an interesting way of approaching it. But I think certainly good regulation, national, international policies, initiatives like ESA's zero debris policy, I think are really positive signals as well.
But Alex, let me just complement something that you just said. It is quite impossible, for example, to launch a mission to recover a satellite that costs, I know, I'm talking about the new space satellites that costs 10 million, and run a mission of 40 million to bring back a satellite of 10 million. And this is the point. And somehow there will be jumping the public responsibilities. I don't have any doubt on that.
I think we have to remember though that there is a commercial incentive for companies that want to preserve their access for the future and want to be able to continue to launch into space, or to continue to have larger satellite installations, or to have, space stations or some type of commercial space station. You want to create an environment where that that's going to be there for years to come, and that you have that opportunity. And we have seen that if you sort of shift this mindset from this sort of first come, it's mine, claiming it, to thinking about like, how do I make sure I'll be able to access this 20, 40, 50 years in the future? I think there is interest in doing that. And we have seen some cooperative sort of government and private cooperation that we've seen in some of these areas with other commons on Earth. The one I always like to talk about is sort of like regional fish management organizations. Yes, it is to your benefit now to go out and get as much fish as you want, but it will not be in the future. So if you want this industry to survive, if you want to be able to fish in the future, if you want to be able to sell, if you want to be able to sustain your society and your people, you're going to have to find a way to do this sustainably and work with others to do that. And so I think, while it's not the same, orbit a shell, so don't just sort of replenish themselves if you let them sit back and let it happen. I do think there are examples where you can get people to work cooperatively if you shift the mindset from, I need this right now, to, will I be able to have this 20 years from now? And it's a hard shift to do that, but I think it does make sense. And you will have people who maybe will even be interested in cleaning up other people's messes so that they can access that space and use it.
I think it's a great point, Alison, and maybe just if I can come back on what Ricardo said. Yes, I absolutely agree. You wouldn't spend 40 million to recover a 10 million asset. And I think that's why you need to make sure that the technology is there so that you can service multiple clients and remove multiple objects when you send a mission up there. It's not just about sending one craft up to remove one craft. And that's, where we've been investing our technology to make sure that they are multi-mission capable. And I think that only gets furthered even more so, and maybe Grant will talk more about this when it comes to refueling. And when you start to look at in-orbit servicing and not just debris removal, but refueling and other types of services in space, you can really open up the capabilities there.
Yeah, I think this is also the future, because this perspective of in-orbit servicing, this is really, I really believe it. It's also some kind of massive way to address the cleaning, what the other guys they did in the past. Let me just put one thing also here in the for the discussion. That there are these, in terms of, this is just a topic, because we are here in Europe, we are discussing this. This is a zero debris policy. It's some kind of coordination between our agencies, and this is initiatives by the European Space Agency to implement some kind of circular economy in space towards the zero debris towards the end of the decades. More or less is, as far as I remember, is to cover, let's say, 90% of the assets to be disposal. So as I said, we are preparing doing this in Europe. But the question is enough, or this should be a global, let's say, a policy or global endeavor of all the countries? We are cooperative if we take benefits, and I really like the Alison perspective. If we take benefits, we are very cooperative, because somehow if we are not cooperate, I can suffer the damage of my irresponsibility. Let's put the things in this way. But how this is like the environment. There are few countries, they are engaged themselves to protect the environment, but we are 10, but there are more than 100, I don't know how many countries in the world. And this, how can we do it? Because you know that there are some cooperative, let's say more cooperative states than others. And there are more responsible states than others. How can we ensure? I think this is even more complex than the technology that Astor scale to remove debris. And this is really rocket science, the global coordination. And I really think this is the work that we all together should be done, particularly in the UN. I don't see any other possibilities. Another point is, should be this data, the data of monitoring, the catalogs, public, to create some kind of ways, you know, that this application that we have in the mobile, the ways of the space debris. This helps ourselves to develop collision avoidance, warning. And you know, this is not Pacific, this is kind of a discussion, because there are somehow some persons, they want to go forward to the classification of this information. How can, this is, look, I'm putting questions because I also have so many doubts in the forum that I participate. I become more and more tricky and lost in this kind of discussions.
So question for you, Alex, also, while we're here on the topic, is in terms of in-orbit servicing. So maybe you can talk about astroscales, again, projections, goals, and targets, and when will that become a routine operation?
Yes, I suppose it will depend on the service we're talking about. But if we talk about debris removal initially, so our first commercial debris removal will be launching in 2025. We've already had an in-orbit demonstrator program. So this is the removal of the first real client that has failed. And I think that for us is going to be the start of routine removals, and we hope then it picks up fairly quickly. And our aspirations is by the end of the decade, what would be a fantastic place to be is if actually it's become boring. We want it to become as as standard as you putting your garbage out for collection, right? So by the end of the decade, I think that would be fantastic goal to aim for. I think other services will closely follow. I think refueling has got is probably a nearer term service that will become routine fairly shortly afterwards. And you're already seeing the life extension missions in geostationary that have potential there. And then I think beyond that, when you talk about in-orbit assembly, manufacture, and other interesting services, not only around the Earth, but also around lunar bases and further afield, I think that they would then follow.
But you need to clean slowly, otherwise we'll clean everything and there are no business for a company.
I mean, that would be an interesting place. If we could get to there, that would be very interesting.
Yeah, got it. So what the question is, I mean, we're now exploring different angles of basically either incentivizing, punishing operators out there in terms of creating the space debris in orbit or in orbit servicing. So how about now we take a different angle and we think about space operators out there and incentivizing them for design, in terms of design and operate their spacecraft in a way that minimizes creation of space debris.
So if I can, yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks. Just very briefly, I think part of this does come from sort of government regulation and policy that has flowed down. into the to the operators. I'll give you an example. And that's both from a design and an operational sort of perspective. Satellite licenses, as an example. Part of the satellite license process is to demonstrate that you have an end-of-life strategy, or at least some nations require this to be able to then launch your satellites. And perhaps an incentivized, sort of a more incentivized approach would be to monitor operators' behaviors throughout their lifetime, see if they have sort of a bit more of a, I guess, safe and responsible behavior in space. At end of life, get the operators to demonstrate that they have either disposed their spacecraft, put them into a graveyard orbit, or if they have a failed spacecraft, have the right technologies on board to use the likes of Astroscale or other partners to deorbit, which could then also support future launches or future satellite missions, which need to be licensed in the same regulatory environment, that could potentially have a lower license fee, a more quicker license lead time, all of which, if you're launching constellations of satellites, can really help reduce the cost of launching spacecraft. So there are different sort of models that can be used from government as well to be able to incentivize operators to maintain a sort of to design and operate, I guess, their spacecraft in a more sustainable manner.
I think that's a great point, because nations right now still control launch, and they're still responsible for the objects that are launched into space. So a commercial company can't just sort of go out on its own and decide to launch something. It has to work with some country or another to sort of get that permission. And a lot of countries are starting to build in more restrictive regulations about how it has to be deorbited, what the timeline is for that deorbiting. And I think there is a lot of movement on that could be very positive.
And another perspective is also to go forward with create a bond when they launch. This is reserved here, because in 3 years you cannot decommission in an activation satellite. We use this to help Astroscale to clean the mess. So it's something that is also perspective, and we are, as I said, participate in several forums, and this is something start to give it some shape. Huh?
So if I can add quickly to that, like Ricardo said previously, it has to be a coordinated and a collaborative effort to deal with this problem of space debris. And this is something I will talk about tomorrow in my keynote session as well. We are developing a solution, a propulsion solution that will deorbit CubeSats at the end of their life when they're in low Earth orbit within 5 years. And while we know that the current regulations state that your satellites in low Earth orbit must be deorbited within 25 years, the FCC recently adopted the new policy of deorbiting satellites within 5 years. So I think there needs to be a regulation in place saying you will only be licensed to launch if your satellite is being deorbited in certain amount of time. And it's not the company that needs to take care of that. I think they must partner with various companies who are either looking at actively deorbiting at the end of life, or they have some other form of solution to basically decommissioning the satellite at the end of life.
I think it's a good point. And as we say, you know, with the deorbiting strategies, that's fantastic when you still have control of your spacecraft. But when you don't, then that's when some sort of service will be required. And I think from a service perspective, what will help realize that debris removal service in the future is making sure that we think ahead and we prepare our spacecraft with docking interfaces. And this can be done at very low mass, very low cost. It doesn't have to be powered. But it gives a point that is easy to capture. And that then makes the future service so much cheaper, so much easier to achieve. So I think that's an important thing for people to consider.
Yeah, in terms of design considerations, I definitely agree with Alex here. I think adding interfaces of different sorts to spacecraft to allow them to incentivize the spacecraft operators to be prepared for future services is a big point. So with the docking interfaces, and then at OrbitFab, we're working on an on-orbit refueling service. And so being able to refuel spacecraft as well can help in certain ways. Say, for example, when there are a lot of collision avoidance maneuvers as debris continues to proliferate and this uses up fuel budgets, operators will then be able to do as many collision avoidance maneuvers as needed without worrying about shortening their mission life or even maintaining that fuel budget that may be necessary to deorbit or push into a graveyard orbit that no longer has to impact their business model if they can then get more fuel on orbit.
Yeah.
I would also
Good.
like to add one thing or bring an analogy. When you compare to cars in many countries on this world, we actually have rules in place where you have to inspect your car at regular intervals and make sure that it's like fit for traffic. And for satellites, such a thing basically doesn't exist. So we put the spacecraft up there and it's there for 10 years. And you might say you have to deorbit it, which we do now in regulation, but there's nothing around that says inspect your satellite at regular intervals and make sure that if certain conditions are not met any longer, that you then deorbit it prematurely, for instance, and end the mission, just to make sure that the satellite will not get stranded. So this is something that happens for cars everywhere, basically. So I would imagine that this is something easy to achieve on national regulation level. So for those who are implementing those laws, I think one can use this analogy and it will be readily accepted. The second thing is you can also, for the operational phase, make sure that people carry provisions to conduct collision avoidance maneuvers. This hasn't been standard practice until very recently, I think. So even today, still many satellites are launched without capability to maneuver. And the operators are also not sharing contact details in case they would be basically facing another satellite in a close encounter, and there is such an exchange is would be necessary. So these are things that are low-hanging fruits, I would say. And even the long-term sustainability guidelines by the UN, they have a long list of recommendations, things that are easy to achieve on policy level, I think. And basically, if you're authorized as a country to do this for your satellite operators and industry, I think they will also not object too much for these things because they're not so difficult to do.
So maybe the thing is to this big discussion that we're having here today is seems like while we're discussing it, it's like simple solutions. We go into this very simple solutions once again, as Ricardo was sharing, and now we're sharing you. It seems like the solution is very simple, but how do we get everybody to understand that there is an issue and really tackle that issue collectively, right? So maybe the real solution, the real answer is very simple: to keep the companies and everybody else accountable to what they're doing and to kind of highlight that, because if it's a public company out there, they have stakeholders and shareholders inside of the company, which they're responsible providing their revenues, their data, they're showing how company is doing business, basically publicly, right? So how about public awareness and how space debris problem can be increased, and we educate the public on and show what role can governments and private companies play in educating the public about this issue. So how much we can get involved in terms of public and educate the public and actually help the public to even push the idea and keep the companies and agencies or everybody else involved accountable to this issue.
If I could come in just quick, I think we're really lucky actually with the space debris problem. It's a very tangible problem that people can understand. Yesterday, I was listening to a panel at another conference on quantum computing. They've got a much harder job than us. I've been into primary schools and talked to kids as young as 5, and they understand that they need to clean up space. And they know they need to put their rubbish in the bin, and they need to put their old spacecraft in the bin. So I think we have a duty really as a space industry to promote this, and I think it's something that's that can be easily done through collaboration to make sure that we do this efficiently. This isn't one company's soapbox to stand on. I think we can do it together. And I think from the government and customer side, I think making sure that there is recognition of outreach appropriately and that is in some way credited in some way, whether it's just simply interaction with good companies that are doing outreach, or if it's some more tangible metric in bidding processes and other areas. But I think we do have a unique opportunity with space debris. It should resonate well.
What I would add to that is that, I mean, I think there needs to be a bit more of a relatable narrative around space debris publicly. What I mean by that, I think first, space needs to be normalized and a bit more accessible to the public. I think the question will always, a lot of people might ask is, why are we addressing a problem in space when there is a big problem on Earth that needs to be addressed in the first place? So in order to tackle that, I guess we need to get our messaging right to the public to appreciate essentially the importance that space has on the everyday life. Without space, which in my opinion is critical infrastructure, it could have a massive impact to someone's life and to economies around the world as well. So sort of having the right narrative and stories around the impact of space debris to various satellites or just generally to our space environment, I think will allow public to have a bit more of a tangible feel for themselves and relatable feel as to why space is so important and why we need to address the issue of space debris and everything that all the issues that it could potentially cause as well.
Right.
Let me just add something on what you are saying. This space ourselves, we are a niche. We are a very small ecosystem compared to other sectors. We are running problems, amazing problems in this crossroad of our existence, which is our environment. And we are not there in the awareness that we need. Look at what we did to our oceans. Is irreversible. We cannot change what we did. And probably 90% of the humankind does not care because they are very busy to survive, right? And this is the point. I really feel it's not a problem for all the humanity. It's ourselves because we are informed persons and we are working in this area. And the only thing to reach this perspective about space debris is to link space sustainability for sustainability for Earth. Link both together. That means to have the capabilities to monitoring what's happened here on our home, we need to have a clean sky. And this is the link or the awareness that we need to rise, because we need a clean space to think on the sustainability, to use space, to use the sustainability of the Earth. And this is really the path that we need to go, because it's quite difficult. And of course, we are not talking about astronauts, spaceships for inspire the persons, the young kids. We are talking about a very serious problem, but compared to the dimensions of the problem that we have on Earth, they even don't exist. We know that it exists because we know we are persons that work in the area, right? But most part of the persons, they don't even are aware about this. And in terms of percentage is really, really negligible compared to what the problems in the pollution that we need to tackle here on Earth. You see?
I think one of the things though that's unique about sort of space, or thinking of it just as in the night sky, is that it is sort of something universal that everybody on Earth experiences. Not everyone has ever been to an ocean or has traveled to different parts of the world, but everybody looks up into the night sky and hopefully they see stars. And I think that's sort of something that we have to remember, that this is part of the cultural heritage of humanity, of humankind, in that we have used stars and constellations to not only travel, but as foundational beliefs for a lot of cultures, and to a lot of different cultural groups, not necessarily sort of a lot of the Western launching areas, but a lot of cultures still look at the night sky as something that's inherently woven into their society, into their culture, into their religion. And I think there is interest in trying to figure out a way to preserve that for future generations. The idea that someday we might have to try to explain to future generations that the night sky once looked completely different, that you used to be able to see stars and constellations and planets, and you can't do that anymore. I think that is something that does sort of trigger people's minds. And I know, like, for me growing up, I've always lived in a city. I've never seen the Milky Way with like my own eyes. I see a couple of the bigger constellations and that's about it. And I think the fact that that might even be taken away is sort of a horrifying concept. And I think people get that aspect of it. They may not understand like what's going on in space, but they can see that in their daily life when they look up in the sky, and it's not the same as when they were a child.
Right.
Exactly. So, sorry, go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I was just going to add, if people are thinking about ways that it can impact their daily lives, imagine if a satellite gets hit and they lose something that they use every day, like weather forecasting or Google Maps, or just calling an Uber to wherever they are. When they feel that real life impact, immediately the problem becomes personal.
Exactly.
And just very quickly, sorry, Martinez, I know we're sort of running short of time, but just back to Ricardo's point. I mean, it's all about making it relatable, which I think everyone has mentioned here. And obviously climate change is high on the agenda for many nations, and just has the sort of the public's attention right now. Space has a role to play in tackling climate change as well. So it's all about the narrative and making sure that we don't emphasize some of the more, I guess, not negative, but we just make sure we have the right stories to tell to the public that that they can all relate to.
Yeah, we need space to tackle the problems that we have here. It is, I think, it is more tangible to really create this awareness, right?
The three notes that I have for myself from today's session, which has been very insightful. It seems like these sessions around space debris, which is, you know, continuous thing for us. We would love to exclude this completely from the International Space Convention, maybe at some point, and hopefully it's going to happen. But while we're going to continue to talk about the subject, and it's really great to see companies like OrbitFab and Astroscale and many others, and the government agencies are deeply involved into the subject, and obviously European Space Agency and many others. The notes that I have for myself is one, awareness, right? As we're speaking about being aware, and Ricardo mentioned that, and just us being aware about the issue and the problem, and continue to link in, right? So continue to link, as also Ricardo described, and also playing our part. So as we continue to play our part, even though that could be small on a bigger scale, as we continue to bring more awareness and play our part, I think it's a tackleable solution at some point, hopefully, right? And I think the fourth one should be hope, right? Hopefully, right? So I really appreciate everybody's input today. There was a phenomenal session, and I hope everybody enjoyed. So the ones who are watching this live, you can access all of these panel speakers through the speaker page and contact them directly. You're going to find request a private meeting form where you can contact with them if you're coming from a government private side, you like to discuss about the issues as we're discussing today, or anything business or government corporation related, and add any other details and contact details from these gentlemen and ladies from the session today. So once again, I appreciate you all joining the session. I wish you a great day, and thank you once again.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Everybody.